Hello everyone. In today's lecture, actually this is the last lecture of this course, you will find several videos. The first one is presented by Professor Kevin Moffitt. He will talk about text mining and its application in the accounting domain. After that, you can find two videos. Both are about data extraction. One is to extract the data from database such as Oracle using SQL language. The other video is about extract information from a web page. And in this video, I will give you a review of what we have learned in this course so that you can prepare for the exam. I will highlight the points that I think are important, but you should be familiar with all the contents that we have covered. There are several points that I want to make. First, what is covered in today's lecture, including text mining and data extraction, will not be included in the final exam. But this does not mean they are not important. Actually, especially for data extraction from ERP systems, it is a very important skill for auditors to have. The video will show you how to use SQL language to do that. Actually, SQL language is also the programming language that you can use for SAS programming, and it is also very intuitive. So I hope you can feel it's interesting and useful. Secondly, I will not ask you to write any programming code like R code in the final exam. I have already tested your ability of writing code in the assignment, so I will not do that in the final exam. All the questions will be essay questions. You will find 5 questions in the final exam, but you only need to answer 4 of them. If you have enough time to finish all 5 questions, what I will do is to grade each one and take the 4 questions with the highest score and sum them up as your final score. The exam is open book and open internet, so you don't need to memorize everything, and you can refer to materials in the lecture and whatever you can find online. But if you want to cite something from online sources, remember to put the reference there. And also, during the exam, you should have absolutely no contact with other students in the class. If you have any question regarding the exam or what some questions you may don't understand, so you can send me an email directly and I will be fully available at that time. Now let's go over the slides one by one. In the first lecture, we have covered analytics, human judgment, and computers. So we talked about why humans are bad at making predictions and how computers can help people in making judgments. And also, of course, we have strengths and drawbacks of database study. You need to understand the advantages and the disadvantages of using database study. We also covered a little bit about business intelligence architecture and big data, but we have a special topic on big data. For the second lecture, we mainly covered audit analytics related software and tools. I think the most important part is obviously the ACL audit analytic capability model. what's the meaning of each stage, and how a company can evolve from the first stage to the last stage. In addition, we also covered the caseware idea and the periodic audit and continuous auditing. You need to know what is continuous auditing and why it is better than periodic audit. Then we introduced the R. We talked about what is R and the advantages and disadvantages of using R. Again, you don't need to memorize these things word by word, but you need to know and get a feeling why this is the case through your experience when using R. After that, we introduced another software named Weka. Although I haven't discussed how to use Weka, but some students are doing projects using Weka to conduct cluster analysis. I'm not going to ask you how to do cluster analysis using Weka, but at least you should know what is Weka. And finally, for this lecture, we covered Tableau Public and Tableau Desktop. Now for the third lecture, we mainly talked about descriptive statistics, basically using R. In this case, you need to know variable types. Remember that in your first assignment, many students got totally confused in classifying variables into different types, so you need to focus more on this. And I also explained 2 additional variable types in the sample answer, and you may want to take a look at that. We have quantitative variable and qualitative variable, and for qualitative variable, they can be classified into nominal variable or ordinal variable. And for quantitative variable, although in total they can be said to be continuous variable, but it can also be divided into interval variable or ratio variable. And then we discussed several distributions, several descriptive statistics for qualitative variable and quantitative variable. So you need to know what kind of statistics you can use and generate for different kinds of variables. And after these steps, we also introduced central tendency and dispersion measures. You need to know what each measure means and what it is trying to capture. You may also want to figure out the result, like the interpretation of the result. If the skewness is positive, what does it mean? For the fourth lecture, we talked about data visualization. So you need to know what is data visualization and why it is useful. You need to also understand for different types of variables what kind of visualization graphs you can use. I'm not going to ask you to write a code to visualize the data, but you need to understand it conceptually. Now, for the fifth lecture, we talked about basic data analysis. Again, I'm not going to ask you to replicate the analysis, but you need to know, like, for example, for accounts payable data and accounts receivable data, what kind of analysis you can do. For example, in what stage you need to do aging analysis, and in what stage you need to do stratification. This is a part that you need to understand. Now, for lecture 6, we have 2 two set of slides. One is duplicate record detection. What you need to know is what is duplicate records and how duplicate records detection works. Also, besides duplicate payments, in what fields that duplicate detection technique can also be applied. For another video, we have Benford's law. For Benford's law, what you need to know is what's Benford's law and why it can work, which means the underlying logic of Benford's law. You also need to understand what kind of data that conform to Benford's law and why they conform to Benford's law. In addition, you need to have an idea of its possible applications and the cautions that you need to have when using Benford's law. For the 7th lecture, we talked about ratio analysis of financial statement. You need to know what ratio analysis is and in what stage it can be used, why it is effective, and of course you should be familiar with those ratios and understand what aspect we are trying to measure. In 8th week, we talked about audit sampling, and we discovered audit risk, audit sampling risk, non-sampling risk, and confidence level. What you need to also know is about two types of audit sampling, non-statistical sampling and statistical sampling. You need to know the difference between these two. For statistical sampling, we covered several examples like monetary unit sampling and attribute sampling. You need to know the difference between these different statistical sampling techniques. And in addition, we have covered the process of doing audit sampling. So you need to have an idea, a rough idea of what are different steps in sampling. In the 9th week, we covered regression analysis in analytical procedure. What you need to know is what is regression and why it is useful and sometimes better than ratio analysis or trend analysis. Also, you need to know what is audit risk and when analytical procedure can be used. For the 10th week, we talked about artificial intelligence and expert assistance in the audit domain. What you need to understand from this lecture is what is expert assistant and what is the structure of an expert assistant. Like this one, it has several components. Also, you need to know the definition of audit ecosystem and have a rough idea about audit data standard. For the 11th week, we covered the cluster analysis in auditing. The first thing you need to know is what is clustering or cluster analysis, and what are the steps in cluster analysis, like showing here, steps in cluster analysis. In addition, you need to know what kind of similarity measures we have and different kinds of cluster methods. Most importantly, you need to know how cluster analysis can fit into audit domain. Why auditors should use cluster analysis. And for the 12th lecture, we talked about big data, its definition, application, and the challenges. The first thing you need to know from this is three-way models. Basically, it's one type of definitions of big data. And you also should know the causes about why we have so much data. What's the underlying motivation for that? Then we talk about several applications of big data, both in helping improving social welfare or help in auditing domain. But there are several challenges associated with big data at each step, like this graph shows. For each step of big data analytics, there will be challenges, and you need to be aware of those challenges. And I also mentioned an example of big data application in auditing, process mining, and I emphasized the cautions that you need to have when using big data in auditing. Again, you don't need to memorize the details of each one, but you need to have a rough idea. When you are asked by a friend, you cannot be blinded, simply say that, all the merits about big data. You should also be aware of the cautions that you need to have. I think that's all for this review, and hope you can prepare the exam well and have a good grade.